Welcome to Topline Talks, Mackie Myers podcast hosted by me, Owen Myers.
And me, Jenna Mackey.
In every episode, we look to meet inspiring finance and business leaders from a multitude of different sectors, giving our listeners great insights into finance careers, different sectors, and also how to get there. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Nicolas Raynaud, who is the Director of Finance Corporate Services at the Science Museum Group. Nicolas, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm not sure I will live up to the hype, but let's see how it goes.
We'll see how we go. A few things we want to try and get through. I think we'd love to spend a bit of time about you, your career, your history, how you got to where you are now. We'll talk a little bit about Science Museum Group and the heritage sector in general. So I think a lot of people that don't know much about the sector can be fascinated about how it works and how it operates and your insights. And then we'll try and cover a little bit around your talent experiences, thoughts around what the talent landscape is like, and just general interview career advice along the way. We'll obviously close with our top line quiz, which I'm sure everyone's excited to find out a little bit more about you as well. So just to kick off, if you could give us a top line summary as to job you do at the moment, Science Museum Group, and how that all fits together.
Okay, so my current role is Director of Finance and Corporate Services, and in plain speak, it means that I'm responsible for 4 support functions: finance, IT, procurement, and legal. In this role, I'm part of the exec team, and as you can imagine, the key priorities at the moment are very much to respond to an adverse economic environment, but we'll speak about that
for sure.
later. Yeah.
And for those, I mean, everyone will be familiar with the Science Museum on Exhibition Road, you know, obviously historical site and well known, but the group is effectively a 6-site enterprise with commercial income generation and research and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. It's a really important point, actually, because everybody, or almost everybody, knows the Science Museum in South Kensington, London. That attracts well over 4 million visitors. But we have 4 museums in the north of England. So we have a Science and Industry Museum in Manchester. We have a Science and Media Museum in Bradford, a small but beautiful railway museum called Locomotion in Childen, County Durham. And then we have our big National Railway Museum in York. And in addition then to these 4 museums in the north of England, we have west, just outside Swindon, our Science and Innovation Park, which contains our National Collection Centre. So, as you can imagine, a storage space that is unbelievably large for a wide range of our collections. And that will open to the public towards the end of this calendar year. So this will be our 6th site open to the public.
Amazing. Quite a portfolio. And so for our listeners' benefit, if you could give just a bit of an insight really as to your background and how you've got to where you are in this job, because it sounds like a big job, you know, looking after quite a big piece. It'd be interesting to see, you know, the chronology and how you've made it.
Yeah. I mean, as you can probably hear, it all starts in France. So I graduated in Paris. I started in banking.
Are you from Paris, or did you study in Paris?
From Lyon, actually.
Oh, Lyon. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Food capital of France,
food capital,
right?
Yeah, oh, I'm so glad you're saying that, because most people know the city just for its traffic jams. So it's got food capital. It's got the largest Renaissance quarter in Europe, much better than Florence. It's got amazing Roman, not ruins, but actually Roman museum and amphitheaters. I mean, anyway, I could wax lyrical about that. But anyway, I studied in Paris, started in commercial banking in Paris at SocGen, Société Générale. I was doing an internal audit job that was more internal consulting than audit. And to be honest, that was not really what I liked. So when I had an opportunity to cross the channel, come to ABN AMRO, which was a Dutch bank, and without really knowing what it was, I went into M&A as a young analyst in what was then the Finance Institution Group. So we were looking after European banks and insurance companies. Yeah. And although the job, was really great in itself, the working environment I clearly realized was not where I would thrive. So I quickly decided that I wanted, a bit more purpose in what I was doing. I wanted to keep the finance content, analytical, the advisory content, but in an organization where I would feel contribute to society in a different way.
Yeah.
And I then moved to the social housing sector that I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
So to a trade body called the National Housing Federation, to one of the big players, Notting Hill Housing Group.
Yep.
And then, over the next 20 years, I worked in various charities that were all mixed economy charities. That's where I think I can add most value. So the ability to apply a commercial mindset to what's done and reconcile that with the charitable ethos thing is what's really, really interesting. So I had that in play in housing, obviously, also at the British Council, where you have a part that's really around cultural diplomacy and a part that's a hard-nosed education business around teaching English and English exams.
Yeah.
The 2010s, for the most part, I spent in international NGOs.
Yep.
Where, in fact, you need to be extremely commercially savvy to sell your projects to funders. And then for the past year and a half, Science Museum Group, where again you have that same tension, I would say, because about a third of our income comes from commercial operations, 20% from fundraising and partnerships. So as you can see, it's literally a half-half business, which makes it so interesting.
Yeah, and so starting in banking, M&A. And then the majority of your earlier roles before you got into sort of more senior leadership were FP&A, corporate finance type focus.
That's right. Yeah.
Was that a deliberate choice to kind of utilise your heritage to do those sorts of roles?
I'm very much through that FP&A and commercial background. I enjoyed interacting with business, whether it was opening a new teaching center in Thailand, visiting a building site in East London, and with the business directors. I think that's where I thought I could most contribute and add value. And I think in that space, then I realized, much as this was not my cup of tea, I absolutely needed to get the controlling area under my belt. So I made sure that I had roles where I was responsible for good old audit, year-end processes, and audit both internal and external, so that I could then move on to bigger things. The other thing in my career early on is I realized having a pure finance specialism can be a bit of a blocker. The organizations are still structured by function, but that's not what makes an organization tick. Of course, it's the interaction between functions, and in particular, IT and HR are the two areas that I think finance really needs to master. So I think early on, I tried to understand IT a bit better. I remember days when I was teaching myself Excel, VBA, for instance, just so that I could have an idea of coding and have a different conversation with IT. I remember volunteering for systems implementation. So in my housing days now, 20 years ago, we were implementing an ERP system, which was pretty pioneering at the time. And that gave me, an opportunity to understand, software and hardware and several concepts that proves immensely useful. And same thing with HR. I think you need to understand the basics of team management, but go much further.
I would say nearly every job we recruit at the moment, or have been for the last number of years, has some form of systems transformation, like technology enablement, element to it. So if it's not just doing your balance sheet recs, it's the future is always going to be that way geared, isn't it? Right. So so I think that's what makes finance roles more interesting today than in the past, in my view, but also more challenging because there's just so much to absorb that it's pretty rare or nigh on impossible to have everything under your belt. So I think one lesson for me also early on was that you need to have a really good senior team and be aware of your strengths and weaknesses, and just be upfront and get people that are much better than you on the areas that you don't know so well. Don't be shy about it. At the end of the day, that's how you make miracles happen. But picking up on your comment about the coding, I have this debate with my wife quite a lot because obviously Science Museum, promotion of STEM type type activities. I'm a strong believer that I think at some point in the future, the national curriculum is going to be reading, writing, maths, and coding. Because I think, the generation of the future, if that's going to be surely a core element. I don't know. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's probably because your kids are too young to know that it's already in the curriculum. So if you study a STEM subject at secondary school now, you will have coding. Yeah. But I would go one step further. What's also bizarre is there's so much automation going on that you can now build blocks by blocks, spread systems. I have a friend in Paris, actually, in a very small charity that was telling me they're building an ERP system with this block module approach, and not one of them has coding knowledge, which is, unbelievable. Of course, I mean, it's relatively basic processes that we need to cover, but it shows you just how far we've come.
Yeah. What do you think the Science Museum Group's role is in promoting STEM in the generations to come?
I think it's absolutely central to our mission and vision. We want a society that loves science and embrace it and grows what we're calling science capital, so general knowledge and appetite for science. And I think our strategy is all around inspiring futures, so the future generations at all ages. So perhaps in comparison with other museums, we're very strong on the offers for minors. So whether the under 5s, the 5 to 10 secondary schools, there's something for all of these age groups in our museums, and we have pretty strong learning activities. I think we're probably, of the national museums, the one that receives the most school visits. It's becoming also challenging with austerity, and some schools no longer able to afford the trip to our museums, but I think we're still going very strong there.
Well, I'm a governor at my kids' school, and they've cancelled loads just because the coach prices have inflated so much because of the cost of fuel. It's like we can't really justify hiring a coach to get the kids there, so it's challenging. Yeah.
Well, I would say fortunately, most of our museums are in city centres, so we're then trying to redouble efforts to get urban area schools to visit.
What would you say is sort of broadly going on in the sort of heritage and museum sector at the moment? Because clearly COVID had a massive impact, as it did across a lot of sectors, but clearly it's not a sector which is flush with cash either, generally. So, how would you describe the sort of sector as a whole at the moment?
Yeah, I would say the sector is trying to find its feet back and properly bounce back from COVID. If you take our group, for instance, it really varies from one museum to the next. In London, we're within 5% of pre-pandemic visitor levels. At other sites, it's lower. So we need to have an even more competitive offer to get visitors through the door. We are, like all museums, affected by the combination of austerity and inflation. So austerity didn't start with COVID, started in 2011, and we lost probably 25% in real terms of government funding then. So when the 2020s happened and COVID, we had a bit of a respite with extra government support, and when that was withdrawn, like all of our museums, we were faced with rising costs. So it's utilities, of course. Our energy bills have tripled initially, so we brought them down. We had of course, construction costs. We have massive building projects, good old maintenance, security, cleaning. You can look at any aspect of your business, and costs have exploded. So the difference between museums in the sector is the strength of their reserves, really. So whether they've been able to have enough to draw down and get them through a tough spot. I think we're probably not the most resilient group in that aspect. So we're just innovative. We have a fantastic commercial operations directorate. We are constantly innovating in our offer. So, for instance, in London, we opened last year a video game play area in what was a relatively grotty basement space.
Yeah.
It's really thriving. It's a great commercial offer. We have virtual reality in York now. You can go on an iconic train journey from London to Edinburgh. So we are constantly innovating and trying as well to change the aspect of our museum. So everyone is in this race, but I think there's probably a lot more happening at the Science Museum Group than elsewhere.
I feel like that brings you back to your comment earlier about balancing commercial activities with like a charity ethos, which sounds like it's becoming more and more prevalent. So how do you maintain that balance between the two?
To be honest, it's an ongoing conversation because I've mentioned this video game experience. It's quite stunning because it's been open just over 12 months. It's a roaring success. What would a commercial organization do? To convert as much space as possible into a video game play area. But we're not an entertainment center. We are a museum, and the way also we approach video games is through telling the story of the games and explaining some principles of game development. So there's really a strong education and learning component. It's on a case-by-case basis. We're trying to also be a lot more savvy in project costing. So having full project costing is something that can be very difficult given the nature of our projects, whether it's a new gallery, a new building. So that internal discipline plus the healthy tension between the charitable activities and commercial ones get us through eventually.
So for many of our listeners who actually maybe want to transition from the commercial sector into the charitable sector, how did you find bringing your commercial experience into that sector and get that balance right?
Yeah, I think it started early on. Because if I remember my housing days, this was a sector that was moving out of government subsidy rules into a mixed economy. So I remember, early on in my Notting Hill Housing Group days, trying to explain how home ownership activities, rental activities could contribute to the overall ethos of the organisation. And so it's important to go back to the basics because organisations are on a journey. So explain how the profits of the commercial side are reinvested into the charitable component. So taking housing again as an example, we had some workshops for disabled people or young offenders that were reinserted into the workplace. That could only happen because we had the commercial activities. They were not very popular with funders.
Yeah, I bet. No, we have quite a lot of clients that are in that space of trying to manage, like, we need to create a surplus in order to reinvest into other areas. And I think everyone finds it quite challenging.
Yeah, and particularly as the fundamental problem is not so much the systems and processes, which are, I think, a bit of a smokescreen. It's really the people. That you need leaders that have very different mindsets. Yeah. Nowhere was it more obvious than at the British Council, where the cultural diplomacy part of it was staffed by, say, Foreign Office diplomats, career civil servants, and the teaching and exams business was staffed by hard-nosed commercial leaders. So I think you've got to acknowledge that you have different skill sets, different views of what looks good, and really at the top set the rules of engagement. So how far is the organization going to go to promote the commercial operations? How is it going to link those to a mission? And as I said, it's an ongoing discussion because, of course, quite often the development of the commercial operations is related to a funding crisis on the traditional government or big funder front. And if I look, for instance, at Science Museum Group, I think we're really, really good at pushing the boundaries of commercial. We latest example being our innovation technology center that opened within the Science Museum in London. It's a commercial tenant hosting that, but it's within our premises, and it will provide a completely different type of corporate event, typically for specifically media companies that are looking for state-of-the-art technology. And at the same time, it gives us access to a new type of corporates that perhaps would not think of a science museum, and then hopefully will become interested in our main corporate event space called Illuminate. So as you can see, we're making, for example, making use of what was, storeroom plus 4D cinema. It was way past its shelf life, turning it into a very attractive commercial proposal in itself, and having a tent from a completely different sector that will bring us people that hopefully will grow our audience ultimately.
And what I'd like to cover is kind of going backwards a little bit, but from your personal point of view, your personal background, obviously the commercial side and upbringing stands out. I guess your desire to get experience across the divide of different areas of finance and into corporate functions probably stands out. But what do you think anything else that might have enabled you to kind of get to, the director job and with a seat at the table having all of those conversations? Because that, that's the mecca for a lot of people climbing the career ladder. It's I want to be in the room having those conversations. What's made you stand out to get to that point, do you think?
I think in my case it was developing soft skills to the level of my hard skills or technical skills, and growing self-awareness. So I probably need to share a personal anecdote that will not be too flattering from my British Council days. So I was at the time in charge of financial planning and analysis. I was on the commercial side. It was a global organization. We had an exams business that was roaring success, and a teaching business that was hit and miss really at the time. So we're talking 2008, 10. I was given basically carte blanche by the managing director to come up with proposals to boost this commercial business. And so I put together a team with real estate specialists. We had HR, of course. We had marketing. We had the teaching specialists, good old finance, IT to look at our systems. And we came up with a real package of measures that were radical. I was constantly advised to think bold and be radical, etc. And the proposals including standardizing the product mix, looking afresh at the pricing policy, revamping our global estate in specific locations, etc., etc. And when the time came to present that to the exec board, I had complete slap in the face because the managing director freaked out and said, well, I cannot put that in front of the CEO and the exec board. And this wonderful piece of work was completely canned. So the light bulb moment for me was to realize actually, technically, it was good. I had answered the exam question, but I had completely forgotten the stakeholder management, starting with individual members of the exec board, starting with, of course, this managing director who in fact didn't want or was not ready at that point in time to be really bold. And I think when you have that type of moment, then I thought, okay, what do I need to do then to develop that self-awareness, be much better at connecting, having my antennas throughout the organization to anticipate reactions, your role play, your findings, socialize them, etc., etc. And I think that's what helped me move to the director level stage.
I think that's a really good way of putting it, having your antennas out in the organisation, putting in the social time, which is going to be really interesting in the years to come, because you take Generation Z, who are obviously very early on in their career. They've grown up in a world where that social interaction is less normal, and so you're seeing lots of trends and lots of analysis that actually they're very happy, generally quite happy texting and Instagramming not Instagramming, what's the new one? Whatever. I'm not big on social media, but actually putting in the work socially in front of people to build those connections is less familiar. So that's probably going to be even more of a thing for people looking to progress to senior level that are just starting on their career ladder as well.
Possibly. I remember in my previous role at BBC Media Action, so the international charity of the BBC, I had a pretty young team. And I noticed that, it was constant screen time. So some of it was due, of course, to the international nature of our work. But I had to push some individuals to just pick up the phone and or use Teams to have a bit of face-to-face contact and not just chat, which is very impersonal, or email, which can be extremely aggressive, no matter how careful you are. So I agree that there's something about the face-to-face interaction that is really essential.
It's a common theme, I think, with everyone we've spoken to on our podcast, is that so much is about relationships and building rapport and, like you say, building a really strong team around you that you might not even be the best in that field. But it's so hard to do that remotely or behind a screen. So unless you're willing to put yourself out there, like, you will always maybe potentially struggle in that area.
But building a strong team is essential to me, because I think you're only as good as the weakest link in your senior leadership team. I tend to think, that I'm leaving some kind of legacy when I move on to another role, and for me, there's no better reward than to think that there will be a strong number two that can step into my role, which happened actually in my last two roles. So, half jokingly, I tell my direct reports, all I want really is for you to be hungry for my job, and I can help you develop the skills to then get there, so that when the time comes, you're going to be the obvious internal candidate and extremely credible against external candidates. That's, I think, sometimes takes people a bit by surprise. I think, is he joking?
Well, enough to say, isn't it? Your job as a leader is to make yourself redundant, but it's also contingency planning and
absolutely,
and all that
succession planning.
So, on sort of recruiting and talent side of things, you've obviously got a big portfolio, so you probably get involved in quite a lot of conversations recently. But what is your assessment of recruiting in this market at the moment?
I think there's a lot of talent out there, and unfortunately there's also the harsh realities of charity budgets that are a bit at odds with what top talent is paid nowadays. So it's really a question of selling the benefits of working for a charity, for a science museum group, for instance, the incredible workplace that we have, the connections you can make through our sites, through the departments, in order to overcome the inescapable reality that salary-wise, we're not going to be competitive with top commercial Big Four, etc., etc. And yet we need people who have this experience to join us. So it's a juggling act. I'm not going to lie, but we've been extremely successful this last 12 months, where there was a big shake-up of our finance department, and we've got fantastic colleagues that joined us with very impressive experience, including M&A experience in one case. So it is possible. It
absolutely is possible. It's just quite hard sometimes.
I think we've noticed that the makeup of your finance team is actually really evenly spread over people with government background, people with charity background, and then people fully from the commercial sector. The ones that haven't come from the non-profit organisations, Science Museum is obviously a great brand in itself, but generally what have been their motivators to join an organisation like yours?
It's been the scale of ambition and the type of projects that we're into. If you look at our operational turnover, we're around about the 80 million mark, but we have 3 times that amount in capital projects. If you look at the total portfolio, so 3 years of your operational turnover, that's pretty big. And we have this constant flow of ideas, whether they're new exhibitions, new galleries, new commercial ideas that make really us, I think, a special place to work in. And I would say, I talked earlier on of inspiring futures, so our strategy, which is also our mission. It is true that everybody lives that. Whether we have a security incident or a new gallery to be open, you can see, the joining up and the pride to be working for the group. That's something very special.
Yeah, for sure. We've always said it often links back to cause. And so it might be that you find...
Yeah, I mean, in our case, I think it's back to cause. It's also back to having a visionary CEO and COO, so exceptional leaders that can infuse the organisation. That's also very important.
Sure. What advice would you give to someone who's listening to you and going, heritage sector sounds great, really varied, really challenging, really rewarding. How do I get into that market?
I think just be on the lookout for opportunities, because as you said rightly, Jenna, we're taking people from a wide range of backgrounds. Yes, some roles will require a government or public sector experience, but others not, or indeed for others we're looking for the absolute opposite. And we have shown that whether it's for finance jobs or IT, we could take people with wealth of experience. There is such a thing as training. We have usual accountancy packages or training packages. So just be on the lookout, apply. It's a very competitive field, I must say. We're lucky to be flooded with applications when we advertise.
Yeah, that's been really insightful. Thank you very much for that.
Leads us on nicely to our little top-line quiz.
Ooh.
So as we said on the way in, we do a little quiz with all of our guests. The first half, I think, like you said, you've recruited quite a lot recently, so we'll focus that around your experience in recruiting. And the second half is probably a little bit of a get to know you.
Okay.
So if you're ready, I'm afraid I'll have to get my notes because I can't remember.
It's not yes, no answers, I hope.
Okay, so question number 1. Online or face-to-face interviews?
Or face-to-face.
Commercial or not-for-profit experience?
Both.
Very political answer. Attitude or aptitude?
It's a good one. Aptitude first, attitude second. So again, both.
Question number 4, presentation or competency-based interview?
Both again, I'm afraid. No, I'm not trying to be funny. But that's how a recruitment process works.
Obviously, up to the questions, too tricky. All right, the second part is a get to know you, really. So hopefully this will be a bit easier to answer.
Yeah.
So question number 1, Lyon or London?
Oh, well, London. That's where I've been for the past quarter of a century. So.
Housing sector or the arts and heritage sector?
Oh, arts and heritage is fantastic, but housing is also my soft spot here.
British Museum or Natural History Museum?
Science Museum Group.
Shameless plug. And very important question number 4, Oppenheimer or Barbie movie?
Oh, you know what? I saw both, like many people, and I loved both, which makes my friends criticize me, because usually people like one or the other. But Oppenheimer at the Science Museum in London on IMAX 70mm, that was the experience
of
the year.
Yeah. Excellent. That is our top line quiz.
From those answers, it sounds like to get to where you need to be, you also need a lot of diplomacy.
Yeah.
It can't do any harm.
Which I rate.
Yeah. So, Nicolas, something we like to ask all of our guests is if you could choose any person or organisation to be next on our podcast, who would you like to see?
Well, I think given what we've discussed today, a really good person would be Paul Ricard, who's CEO of Pocket Living.
Yeah.
It's a relatively young company, I think created about 20 years ago, and it's come up with a very clever concept, which is to develop standard homes, pocket homes, aimed at first-time buyers or middle-earning income families. And these homes, or flats I should say, are sold at about 20% below market value. And they managed that through a super clever funding model, really good networking with local authorities and excellent staffing. So I'm sure Paul will be able to explain that to you in a compelling way.
Fascinating. You've done a great intro, so maybe you won't have to if we get him on as well. And that's a wrap. So thank you very much, Nicolas, for joining us today. And for those of you, if you have liked what you hear, please do hit subscribe. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify and YouTube. But for now, that has been Topline Talks, and thank you all for listening.